Tell me if you've heard this before. The Florida Panthers are dominant early, but mistakes and untimely turnovers cost them once again.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, December 22nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MonoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. And today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. So the Florida Panthers, they welcome in the St. Louis Blues to town on Thursday night, their first game at Amerant Bank Arena since December 8th. And tough one for the Panthers as they were dominant early, but costly mistakes for the Florida Panthers had them fall behind, and the St. Louis Blues don't look back from there. And we're going to talk about this more with our guest today because it is a Friday, which means it is a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show where Nick Fairbanks is here to discuss this Florida Panthers 4-1 loss against the St. Louis Blues at home. So now the Florida Panthers go 9-5-0 at home, but still tied for second in the division. Nick, tough one for the Panthers, and honestly, for the listeners and the viewers here, this is the first time that we've had a podcast, you and I, where we don't talk much prior to recording. We just wanted to go straight into it. So, how are you feeling?
There's really not much to say. I mean, honestly, that was a very boring, very uneventful game after the first period for the Florida Panthers. And, as you said at the top, it just seems like it's the same story over and over now. Florida will dominate for a certain period of time where they should have scored. And then, there's a lucky shot or lucky bounce that goes in for the other team. And then that basically is it. So you have to wonder kind of what's going on in the Panthers locker room, or what's the mindset now, because, once you start repeating things a lot, that becomes your behavior. And also, that's how you're going to play. And you really got to start wondering again, like, are these guys playing as hard as they could be? And I am going to question one of the Panthers later in the show about their play. But it's getting to the point now where I'm not worried, but it's getting to the point where, like, my patience is getting very thin.
Yeah, you're not the only one there as far as that for the Panthers. And you think about the Panthers, just their last 5 games. I mean, you score 7 goals, but 5 of them come in one game and all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just tough to swallow when you think about that. And you think about the first 2 lines, the top 2 lines for the Panthers were getting their opportunities early. They were crashing the net. But I mean, and they were going against Joel Hofer, their backup goaltender, not Jordan Binnington today, who came 5-0 on the night, 893 save percentage, and all. Never faced the Panthers and too. And even the Panthers, they were getting, like I said, they got in front, but they were beating Hofer early, but not the post too. Matthew Tkachuk had a great opportunity on a redirection as well. And the Panthers were in on back checking and not allowing the St. Louis Blues to get a lot of zone time as well. I mean, Nico Mikkola had a big hit early. So did Brandon Montour on Jordan Kyrou as well, and all. But it's just you got to wonder if it's a lack of confidence for this team as well. But then we saw in the second period how the Panthers were, they were pinching up in the offensive zone and even in the neutral zone, and that proved costly. And I mean, listen, the Panthers lost to the Blues late in the game and their home game last year. Why? because the St. Louis Blues used their speed to their advantage. It was the same thing today. The Panthers miss out on an opportunity. The Blues counterattack, quick passing, get Sergei Bobrovsky all out of sorts on a 3-on-1 tic-tac-toe. Jordan Kyrou scores, and the Panthers, I mean, they could have it could have been worse if the Panthers, if they didn't challenge for offsides just 23 seconds later, where they go on another odd man rush 2-on-1 as well, and it's successful. And then Gus Forsling turns it over at the Panthers blue line, and then they go on another odd man rush, where maybe Bobrovsky might want to trust Barkov a little more with defending that, but still, it's an instinctual play there for Bob as well, and it's backbreaking when you win a challenge and then it deflates again, where Pavel Buchnevich was like, "You're gonna deny me once? Nope, not so fast. I'm gonna get my goal."
Yeah, and that's been the issue with the Panthers, is that their defense, while it's great in most situations where you can pinch and keep the play alive and get the puck down low, after the first period, they weren't winning a lot of battles down low. The only line that I feel like was winning battles was the Bennett line, and it was Sam Bennett himself. Of course, Tkachuk went on the top line to try and get his engine started, but too many pinches, and the Blues knew exactly what was going to happen, and they took it to the Panthers. I've not seen so many odd man rushes as I had all season until tonight. And on top of that, it seems like to me that the defensive identity ever since Montour and Ekblad have come back is different. I don't believe that they're playing shutdown. I believe that they're going for offense because, yeah, they're not scoring a lot, but it's also causing a lot of havoc on the back end, that guys are they're not doing what they need to be doing. They're not making the smart plays.
Yeah, and we saw some desperation where even Montour's getting towards the end boards for checking as well, where you're trying to create some type of opportunity in order to get some disruption as well. And let's also not forget that the even after the challenge, Paul Maurice talked to his team again, and the broadcast even read his lips saying, "Everyone calm down." Even spoke about it with Katie, and this was when it was 1-0, thinking that it was all raining in and all that stuff. That's paraphrasing Paul Maurice's words there. But the crazy thing is that they could have been shut out too. I mean, the one goal that they score is a fluke goal that Eetu Luostarinen gets off the glass. Hofer thinks it's going to go towards it's going in deep, and then it goes into the net. And then the Panthers, they get another one, but the easiest call the referee will make when Ryan Lomberg gets his stick up high and redirects off Torrey Krug's head and into the net, where it was the easiest call they would make there. But line changes there. You spoke about Tkachuk trying to get it going as well. Kevin Stenlin, William Lockwood going up to that third line for the Panthers as well on the night as well. And even before the third one, Bobrovsky makes such a great stop, and Forsling getting a good poke to disrupt a chance out in front. But once again, the Panthers, they were getting their bodies in front, not converting. And then Torchenko, the redirection is just like thinking, man, it's you just throw up your shoulders and say, what do they have to do to buy a goal?
It's been that way for what are we talking about, like 12, 13 days now? I mean, they got shut out twice on the West Coast, and now they basically should have been shut out this game, as you were saying. And what do they have to do? I mean, what is it, the power play? Is it the team itself? Is it just they're not finding the opportunities? Are they overpassing? Are they trying to make the pretty plays? And they just got to go back to basics, just get the puck up the ice, win the board battles, and go to the net. I believe that this season that they are a perimeter team, and that's why they're not scoring. They're not getting down low. They're not scoring the dirty goals. And that's a lot to do with Matthew Tkachuk. And that's the one guy that really needs to get going, because it's been they played like 31, now 32 games. And I've yet to see him come out and actually put on a dominant performance that he had last year.
And speaking of the power play, the first half of that power play, the Panthers were getting all the entries, but then once they had a whistle and they got that second unit off, they didn't have any zone time at all. And for the St. Louis Blues in that third period, I mean, Randy Mueller spoke about how they were going for that 1-2-2 forecheck, only having one forechecker there, and so they're not sacrificing any pinching that leads to an odd man rush, and that's the thing that happens when you fall, when you in the case of the Panthers falling behind, that
Mm-hmm.
that you're not going to see uh them generating speed, especially if the St. Louis Blues happen to turn it over in their own offensive zone. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we are going to discuss when we thought this game was won or lost, and discuss more about Matthew Tkachuk and just how it's just been continuing to be a difficult season for him as we continue on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper, and a new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. Sam Reinhart could score 50 goals. The Panthers could hoist the Stanley Cup, and you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy contests. And all you have to do is pick studs like Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, Sam Reinhart, if they will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. Use code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Locked On has officially launched the first ever national sports 24 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel. Back on this Friday, December 22nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast here on a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show. And Nick, this one's an easy one for me, as when I thought this game was won or lost. I kind of said it in the first segment, but when the Florida Panthers won that challenge and then Buchnevich scored just 3 minutes after, I'm thinking, man, you have an opportunity to get pucks in deep more, which the Panthers were even doing before that goal, and in on the forecheck, and then Buchnevich goes and scores there. And that's my moment as far as when I thought this game was won or lost. The moment that I'm just thinking, man, it's going to be a tough one for the Florida Panthers to come back. And there's that saying that the first game back from a long road trip is always the hardest, because, I mean, even for me, and I'm not even traveling with the team, and staying up and watching the team, and even the mental side of it, even for me watching it, is tough. I can't even imagine for the players and all that when it comes to coming back home and trying to get their legs going again. Even for me, a 7:00 puck drop was a little weird this week after what we went through the last few weeks. But the Florida Panthers going into after 2, they're 11-0 now going into the third period when they trail. The St. Louis Blues going into this were 13-1-0 into the third period when they led. Now 14-1-0. What was your moment when you thought this game was won or lost?
Actually, the called off goal by Buchnevich, I thought that, the first goal was just, it was unfortunate breakdown, perfect tic-tac-toe play. But then to come back right away and score 23 seconds later, I think that shocked him. Maurice did the right thing, used that challenge to kind of tell the team to settle down. But it really didn't seem to change the course of the game at all. I mean, yeah, they scored. But at the same time, just it never felt like the game was within reach after that. See, not Seattle, sorry, St. Louis, they just seemed like they tightened it down. They were not going to allow a lot of inside shots, and they just kept Florida, chasing or not winning any puck battles. So, they did a great job. And, it seems like that they've kind of turned a corner a little bit after making their coaching change, probably about a week ago. So, Hats off to them. But at the same time, Florida has to find a way to come back. And, Goldie says, during most of the games this year that Florida has that comeback, gene in them. And I've yet to see it this season.
I'm
It's either they're
questioning it.
going into, yeah, exactly. So like, do they have to have the lead going into the third, or can they be tied? And no, they need to score the first goal. They need to feel better about themselves instead of firing everything they can and not being able to score. And now, just it seems like every other game they'll throw the kitchen sink at the goalie and then they get scored on once or twice and that's it.
Yeah,
There's no
and
push.
that's the thing with playing with the lead versus not. We speak about style of play and all, and I'm I'm looking this up as I'm talking when it comes to the Florida Panthers and their record when they do score first. 12-0-2
Yep.
versus going into tonight 6-11-0 when their opponents do in fact score first. And this is one of those games where you look at all types of numbers, where you look at face-off numbers, Corsi for, even the expected goals, and you look at it, and if you don't watch any part of the game at all, you think to yourself, this doesn't make sense. I haven't even looked at the deservo meter from Money Puck, so I'm not going to bother, honestly. And you just look at the different opportunities that the Panthers had as they got in front. I mean, as soon as the St. Louis Blues went up 3-1, Sam Bennett had a beautiful opportunity backhand on an unforced error by St. Louis, and goes backhand and misses the net completely. And
Yep.
there's nobody. It was in the low slot too. And I was like this, hands over my head for those people
The
listening on
Cobra.
audio, and I'm
Hmm.
just thinking, man, this team just I believe they're just overthinking it a lot. And we kind of answered this in the first segment, but there's one of the bullet points on the YouTube. If you're looking at this on YouTube, if this is just who the Panthers are, and I think we answered our own question. This is who they are at this moment in time.
Yeah, and teams are going to go through different parts of the season where they're going to try and figure things out. And you know we were elated how they started the season. Going into December, nobody had picked them to do that well without Montour and Ekblad, and now we're trying to figure it out with them on the roster. So I mean, again, this is just going to be another period in time where they're going to have to figure it out and find a way to. Um, adapt and really find out, what can we do to get Montour going? What can we do to get Ekblad going? And most importantly, again, what can we do to get Matthew Tkachuk going? And, maybe it's going to have to be this time off. They'll have another game against Vegas here upcoming, which can be scary, but, maybe you can go into the break with a solid win and feel good about yourselves and then start the new year on a great start, on a great way.
Yeah, and trying to look up Matthew Tkachuk's total shots if they're updated on Hockey Reference. They don't look to. It doesn't look that it's updated at this point in time, but
He's not
still
shooting a
leading.
lot.
Still leading the team in shots. I mean, I'm just gonna do some quick math. He's averaging 3.6 shots a game. But we could talk about that number, but let's talk about the quality too, about
Correct.
getting in front and the second chances as well. And listen, despite getting bodies to the net, the St. Louis Blues, they were bodying up the Florida Panthers pretty well up in front, so that they weren't even getting the second chance too.
Hmm.
That and that could be a step in the right direction, because they weren't doing that much in the road trip, especially towards the tail end. But still, the St. Louis Blues were still putting their body out in front, and still getting the necessary clears so that the Panthers didn't get. And with the backup goaltender as well, in the case of the St. Louis Blues, you're going to protect them more, and that's just the nature of hockey teams, and just when they go on the ice, when they have their backup in versus their starter. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we have some great news, actually. Despite the Florida Panthers dropping this game against the St. Louis Blues, we do have some news on the Florida Panthers' new practice facility and when the facility will be opening up. We are going to discuss that more on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit available to U.S. customers. Segment number 3 here on this Friday, December 22nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show. So, we got some news today as far as in the world of the Florida Panthers and the team. We spoke about this a few weeks ago. It was that we actually discussed this on a Winans Wednesday, where Emily Kaplan said that the facility would open on December 1st. Okay, December 1st goes by, no practices. We knew it was close, but the Florida Panthers officially announced that they will be holding their first practice at the Baptist Health Iceplex at War Memorial in downtown Fort Lauderdale. It's been a project that has been in the works since May of 2021, since they broke ground as well. And just think about the start of the project, what's happened since: a President's Trophy, a Stanley Cup Final, buzz around the region, and with this being a lot closer to the players. I mean, and think about it like this: Panthers, every single time they have an opportunity to practice, unless there's an event going on at the arena, they're practicing at the arena. Now they have a place to themselves, which it's not open to the fans yet. The place the where they practice is 1,000 seats. So they will there's no announcement yet about practices open to the public. There will be restaurants and all open in the spring too. So it's going to be a world-class facility for the Florida Panthers, and I'm super excited. And why we're recording this immediately as well and trying to get this out to you is your boy will be waking up early tomorrow morning to head down there to cover the event, and I will be at Saturday's game against the Vegas Golden Knights at 3 p.m. So excited to be back in South Florida. But Nick, hearing the news about the War Memorial and the practice facility, got to be excited, right?
Definitely. And, hockey's actually coming to Fort Lauderdale. It's something that I think is, the Florida Panthers have been trying to make happen for a while. And now that they had this opportunity where they were able to rehabilitate War Memorial, thanks to, Vinny Viola and Doug Sifu, which will now draw more people downtown and could draw more people who were not into hockey before. They now have an accessible place where they can actually start learning how to skate, learning how to play. And on top of that, you're going to get more younger fans involved there. Instead of going to the beach, now you can go to this nice little practice area and this rink and, try to learn from there. And maybe South Florida can start producing more NHL talent. And, I think that's the end goal. I mean, look at, I don't want to put Arizona or Phoenix out there, but, they were able to, produce Austin Matthews. Who's to say that Florida won't have like a top pick here in the next 10, 15 years? And just because of something like this is finally complete. So very exciting, and can't wait to see it when it's actually open to the public. And jealous that you're going to be able to see that tomorrow.
But for the Panthers and all that in the region, also don't forget Tage Thompson is from Arizona as well, and our very own Matthew Tkachuk as well. So, which Matthew Tkachuk got to face against his hometown team. Also spoke about his dad Keith Tkachuk being inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame. So definitely, even before the season, Matthew Tkachuk and Brady got that opportunity to announce it to their father as well. So definitely a market that's produced a lot of talent, and definitely for the Panthers and South Florida, they can bring this community together and all that stuff. And as far as, once again, open practices until it's 100% complete, according to George Richards of Florida Hockey Now, and they're going to add a second sheet of ice. So right now, the first sheet of ice is done. So slowly but surely, and all. But you can follow me on X and Instagram, as I will be covering the event, so you could see, at least try to envision it through my eyes, at least. So do my best to paint the picture as well, and of course talk about it on the podcast next week and give you a reaction as well. So the Florida Panthers will be welcoming in the Vegas Golden Knights to town on Saturday. As we know, it's a Stanley Cup Final rematch. And honestly, I'm really liking that this is, if you're going to put this on a Saturday, thank goodness it's 3 p.m. so we can get along with the holiday. But this is as important of a game for the Florida Panthers as can be, because I think about the mental side of things for the Panthers. And going into the holiday break, you're going to be there. We're currently in a roster freeze. I didn't even mention that Anton Lundell didn't even play once again. But with the roster freeze, you're hoping that the Panthers, could get him back in. And Paul Maurice said he was hopeful for their game against the Vegas Golden Knights. They did drop their game against the Tampa Bay Lightning tonight, 5-4. And it looks like the Vegas Golden Knights are without both their goaltenders. Aiden Hill played his first game in a few weeks and then left early. Logan Thompson finished that one. And now Logan Thompson is day-to-day. They have both of their AHL goaltenders there. But for the Vegas Golden Knights, a good part of their team is back. So you had the Barbashevs. They traded Riley Smith in order to keep him. Jack Eichel is still hard to deal with on the ice. I mean, Jonathan Marchessault and Chandler Stevenson are working for contracts. Pietrangelo and Alec Martinez are on that top pair. So still the structure around the Vegas Golden Knights is still pretty elite. And looking at their record real quick, they're still top of the Pacific. We talk about, I guess, there hasn't been a lot of talk about around Vegas this season because they're the champions. This is the expectation. I mean, we've talked so much about Vancouver that we didn't even mention that they're still second behind Vegas, that there hasn't been talk about Vegas as well. But how are you viewing this matchup? And what would be your over and under for pushing and shoving after a whistle? How many minutes in would you say?
So that's a good question. I think this is a big game as any in the last 2 weeks, just because, again, you're playing I'll say your Stanley Cup rival. You want to measure to see where you're at and what progress you've been able to make. I mean, the moves that Bill Zito made in the offseason were in reaction to how Florida played, Vegas in the Stanley Cup. They weren't big enough. They weren't, unfortunately, strong enough. And, you go out and you get a guy like Nico Mikkola, Nico Mikkola. Sorry about that. Had it twist around. And, you try to get bigger up, in center. So that's why you bring in Stenlin, guys like that. So you'll definitely see, I think, a different side of the Panthers and see how they play against, this Vegas team that's still doing really well. The one thing I do want to add about this is that Florida has not played well against goaltenders that they really haven't played against before. It just seems like that's the norm. So if, Vegas is actually going to be starting one of their AHL goaltenders, yeah, we might still be getting more of the same. But to answer your question, honestly, I'm probably going to say about 80% is going to be pushing and shoving after the whistle. I think, the first 10 minutes is not going to happen. After that, there's probably going to be a couple runs and it's going to get a little chippy.
Mm-hmm. My over under as far as minutes, as far as the first pushing and shoving, I'm going to say 3.5 minutes as far as the first one, because I mean, I don't know if I want to put desperate. I don't know if I want to call this desperate times for the Panthers. I mean, they're still tied for second in the Atlantic, and I was simulcasting the Buffalo Toronto game at the same
Yeah.
time,
Hmm.
and I'm thinking when it comes to I know this isn't locked on Leafs, but if I'm thinking about the problems that the Florida Panthers have versus what the Toronto Maple Leafs have, I'll take the Florida Panthers' problems any day, honestly, before I'll take the Maple Leafs' problems as far as goaltending and blue line injuries as well for what they're going through. So they're still in a race. So I don't know if I don't know if I'm there yet as far as this has to be desperate times, but there needs to be a sense of urgency in this one because
Correct.
you will have 3 full days of just thoughts in your head about this recent stretch. It's important to go into those next 3 days right before the Florida Panthers leave to Tampa because they're not leaving the state for the rest of the month. So because they have this game on Saturday against Vegas, go quick trip to Tampa, and then back to back against the Rangers and the Habs. So huge to get this win on Saturday.
Definitely is. And again, you want to go into this break with your head held high. You want to have a good time. You want to be visiting with your family. You don't want to be thinking about the stretch that you've had for the last 2 weeks. And, I think it would be, again, a good measuring stick to see where the team is. And if they can actually put on a solid game and keep things tight and not let it get out of hand like it did in the Stanley Cup, unfortunately, I think you feel pretty good about yourself. And, if they start doing things the right way, where they start getting dirty goals and they start winning more battles and the forecheck's actually working and the defense actually, shoots the puck on net instead of everything wide that it seems like it's going on these days, then those little things will start snowballing and it'll start creating a much better product and you'll start feeling better about yourselves and your game.
Yeah, and for the Florida Panthers and all, they they haven't been successful against the Vegas Golden Knights in their history, but at home they are more successful.
Hmm.
They have actually won more often. They've actually won 4 times in the regular season at home. And then if you add one more, Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Final. So that's one encouraging thing about the Vegas Golden Knights and the Florida Panthers all-time series matchup, even though they still have yet to get their victory in Vegas in regular and postseason. But Nick, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Another successful Fairbanks Friday, as you came off the IR actually for
Yeah.
this edition. Didn't mention that on the top of the show, but thank you once again for joining me, my friend. And tell everybody where they can follow you online.
Armando, thanks again for having me on. And everybody, you guys can follow me on X at Prudentious0. Let's go get a win on Saturday and let's go into the holiday this weekend feeling good about ourselves. And happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays, everyone. And see you next week, my friend.
See you next week.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steer and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Nick Fairbanks. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.